worse of you. We ought to just write it down and give it to you.
No, this is much better. Okay. Well, I've got it recording now, and so we're just gonna.
Just throw it down.
I mean, don't even worry that the camera's on. You can just talk to us, and what we want to know is we just want to know everything. That's all.
All of a sudden.
But you need to guide them.
But
Yeah,
first,
we-
I think first I'd like to know. We'd like to know just a little bit about your parents, and who they were to you guys growing up, and you know, where were they from? What were their passions? What were their weaknesses and their strengths? And maybe that's what we could just do tonight, is just learn about your parents and and you know, briefly about your siblings as well. And Grandpa, if you'd like to start.
Well, all right.
And if it's all right, we'd just like to, you know, if we have questions, we'll just interrupt you and ask you
Right.
more.
I like the comment in the scriptures that says I was born of goodly parents, and I feel that way about it. I had a wonderful father and a wonderful mother, and it so happened that I've never known any grandparents or any other relatives other than my mother and father because they were both from the old country. My father was born in Göteborg, Sweden. My mother in Oslo, Norway. Her name was Jenny Samuelson. Father's name Alfred Swenson.
Jenny Emily sang.
Yes, Jenny Emily
Make that
Samuelson.
clear.
And they both individually, were converts to the church in their own countries and came here for the church and settled in Utah. And was here that they met. And they met at the church function at the Salt Air Resort. And that's where they first became acquainted, being introduced by common friends. And they eventually got married, and father was 42 when he was married, mother 27. So there's quite a disparity in their age, plus the fact that they got a late start. But they had 5 children, and I was the youngest, and the next to me was Randall, who passed away, who died in his infancy, whom I never knew. And then the next oldest was Elmer, my older brother. The next oldest was my sister Eva, and my oldest brother was Heber. So there's Heber Alfred, Eva Marie, Vernie Carlisle, and
Yeah.
who else did I miss?
Elmer.
Elmer
Fudge.
Elmer Leroy Swenson. So that's our family and my siblings.
Deb, can we just, since you're talking about names, tell us who you were named after and tell us how funny it was that your mother couldn't
All
pronounce
right, well, I came by my name Vernie, and one will never quite understand why, but my parents named me Vernie, and they could never say V, they could only say W's,
Because
And
they were
because they were Scandinavian. And so my name to them was not Vernie, it was Wernie. And I was always called Wernie by my mother. But the reason I was named Vernie was because of a patriarch who befriended my parents when they came to this country and when they were married. And his name was Vernie Halliday. And being the patriarch and the human they admired very much. And so somehow my name just was adopted by them to be named after Vernie Halliday.
And what stake were your parents in? What? Who's the
The
picture?
Ensign Stake,
The
the
Ensign.
18th Ward of the Ensign State, up on the avenues around First Avenue and all the way up to the highest avenues, and from State Street to about G Street, or even further than that perhaps, the Ensign State.
And what did your father do?
My father worked in some kind of a clothing factory in Sweden before he came to this country.
So many did.
Then when he came here, he found a job as a janitor in the Louise, Emery, and Grace apartments. And they were owned by Mr. Bransford of the Bransford Apartments and of the Eagle Gate Apartments. And these apartment houses, there are 3 of them, just inside the Eagle Gate Monument, and just inside the Lion House and Beehive House on State Street at the base of Capitol Hill. So the state capitol, we could see it right at the top of the hill, way at the top. We were right at the bottom of the hill, and we lived in those apartments, and our address is actually number 2 Canyon Road. And we entered from Canyon Road down into the basement of this one apartment. And the other apartments were all on First Avenue, and they were the ones that were rented out, and they were quite nice. But we happened to be relegated to the basement apartment.
And
Tell us about the basement apartment.
Yeah.
Because I think that's quite fascinating down by the broiler.
The basement apartment was comprised, you can go down the steps and it was dark, and you go into a laundry room, because this laundry room was for the use of the tenants and renters, so that they could come down to do their washing. And there were dryers that you'd pull these dryers out of the container. They had many bars on them, and then you'd hang your clothes on the bars and push them back into the area where they had heat and dry the clothes.
Because they didn't have the dryers,
They didn't
electric
have
dryers.
washers and dryers in those days. You'd have to use hand washing ironing boards, and they had bins there with water that you could wash your clothes and dry your clothes down there. And that was for the convenience of the tenants. And there was literally a laundry room and a storage room. There were storage rooms down there too for the tenants to put their overflow, like you have storage rooms in condominiums and places now in apartments. And we would have to go through the laundry room and down this row of storage rooms to get to our unit. And so it was a very inadequate, really almost embarrassing entry to our home. But once inside, our bathroom, by the way, was outside in the hallway across from the storage room. And then we'd go in the door into our house. We had a kitchen and 2 bedrooms and a living room. And
so
our heat,
for the 4 children,
4
and your
children
parents.
and my parents. Uh-huh.
And how long did you live there?
I was born there, actually born in the bedroom downstairs, and my mother having giving birth to all of her children down in that basement apartment.
With the aid of a midwife, or?
Evidently, someone helping, obviously. Whether it was a doctor or a midwife, I do not know. Our heat was from hot water pipes that were in the ceiling. They were exposed all around the apartment. And those hot water pipes supplied the hot water to the upstairs apartments, where they provided our heat in our apartment building, in our apartment. It was literally a basement apartment, and it was rather austere.
And so
My
you
parents
say
were
you were
rather
born there, and then you grew up there.
Grew up there until I was 19 when I went on my mission. And when I came back, my parents had moved out of the apartment to a place where my sister and her husband had on 5th East, and they were living with them.
Tell me about your mission, about your paying your way and how you ran out of money.
Hold
Well,
on. Let's hear about your parents and your family, and then we'll kind of go into your lives as you've grown up, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Oh, that's fine.
I think Shirley should have
And,
a chance now to tell her background.
and Grandpa, if you need a drink or anything, or Grandma,
I'll bring some over.
bring
You're
it.
fine.
So tell us about your parents.
Well, my mother was born in Alpine, Utah, by American Fork. In the beautiful area now, they're building $1 million homes. But at the time that she lived there, they were small little frame homes. A few log cabins around. Brigham Young sent my great-grandfather to Alpine. My grandfather was born about 6 weeks after they arrived in the valley, and they used to park their wagons in the old tithing lot. Do you know where the old tithing lot is? Where the Hotel Utah
Oh, really?
was, or the Joseph Smith Memorial Building now. And they'd pull their wagons into that tithing lot until Brigham Young would meet with the people, and then he would send them to different areas to help to establish, colonize little cities and towns. And from there he would send people even up to Canada and down into Mexico, Colonial Juarez, around there, and different, and up into Idaho and to Arizona. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, used to walk with men over the mountain range there from Alpine over into Draper, up into Little Cottonwood Canyon, and there he would help them chip the granite. He worked in the granite quarries for the Salt Lake Temple.
And how often did he do that?
Oh, they would go and they would leave and stay there 4 and 5 days, all week long, and then walk back to Alpine over the mountain and stay home on the weekend, and then walk back to the granite quarries, and they would chip these huge blocks of granite and put on wagon trains, and the first road to the temple was Highland Drive. And that came out of Little Cottonwood Canyon, and they would load the granite on those wagons and take them down to the Salt Lake Temple. So when I go to the temple, I think of my great-grandfather working on those big granite blocks to help build the temple. Isn't that interesting?
And he's your great-great-grandfather.
No, it was
Great,
my
great?
Huh?
Our,
Oh, yeah.
He's our
David Jackson Hamnet, and he was from England, and Parley B. Pratt was the one that went over to England. Joseph Smith
no job.
told them to go to England and be missionaries, and it was Parley P. Pratt
Let's
that
go
brought
get you.
my grandfather, baptized my grandfather into the church. And my grandmother was my great-grandmother was from quite a wealthy family in England. And when my grandfather heard about the church and was going to the meetings with the missionaries, he invited her to come. And she was really taken with the church. She thought a lot of the people that she had met from America, and she wanted to join the church. And just as soon as she told her parents what she wanted to do, they wouldn't let her out of the house. They wouldn't let her go to the meetings, and they got a guard for her. And the guard came, I guess, every day or at night to see that she didn't leave the home.
Really?
And so she finally ran away and was baptized in England,
Wow.
and her wealthy parents disowned her, wouldn't have anything to do with her. And I think her name is Wild, W-I-L-D-E. So if you ever hear of any people by the name of Wilds, they're relatives. A lot of them are down in Payson. And that's where my great-great-grandmother is my great-grandmother is buried, is in Payson, Wild. And my mother's mother had 10 children, lost 4 of them at birth. And but 6 lived at good lives, long lives. And then my father was born in Salt Lake, and his mother was from Switzerland, Weinfelden, Switzerland. They were the keepers of the wine fields. And their name were Keller. So the Kellers, and that's how we go into the Keller family of, did you ever see The Miracle Worker? Well, that's a relative. Helen Keller is not a distant relative, but she's in our lineage. Helen Keller,
Well,
if you studied her.
Tell us more about your mom and your dad.
Well, my father had, let's see, there were 6 of them in the family, and they lived in Sugar House.
What was his name?
Walter Edwin Salm, and my mother was Catherine Ann Hamnet, H-A-M-N-E-T-T, Salm,
S-A-L-M.
S-A-L-M. And I've been known to be Solomon and Salem and Salmon and Salm. A lot of people couldn't even say Psalm.
What was your mother like?
Mother was, it was interesting. Mother was always saw to it. She, up until she was older and wasn't too well, she was active, and she was in the primary presidency, and she attended DUP and attended meetings and Relief Society. But as she got older and she wasn't too well, I can't remember her going to church with my sister and I. There were only the 2 of us. My sister Kay, Psalm, and she married a Psalm. S-A-L-M married an S-O-H-M. Psalm. And my father worked at the Kennecott Copper. It was first the Utah Copper out in Magna. And he worked there 43 years. And he and my mother, she left Alpine and she went to Magna to work in a boarding house. They had a lot of boarding houses out there for the men who had come to work for the copper company. And that's where she met my father. And he was he was very quiet, but he never spoke much about his mother and father to us. He just didn't talk much. And I didn't learn a lot until after his death. And he was the oldest of the 6 children. He was very good in math, and he wanted to go to the University of Utah. So he saved his money to go. And I probably told you this before. His mother and father died and left him to take care of two sisters and 3 brothers. And he was the 6th one. So what he did was the money that he had saved to go on to college, he went to the mill to work, and he would send money to he'd come on the weekends to take care of them, because he had a sister 12 and one 14, and he sent them to LDS Business College. So they became secretaries. Then he sent one of his brothers to the University of Utah, and he became the rate agent for the Pacific Northwest.
Wow.
And he paid for his mission before he became a rate agent. You know, and he got married and all.
Your father paid for his brother's mission.
He paid for his brother's mission, and then he had one brother. They couldn't keep in school. He was always playing hooky, but he was a smart fellow. And he finally, after his parents died, he finally ran off and went to California and joined the Navy. Now he was, if you can imagine, he was a little yeoman 3rd class, or about the lowest you could get in the Navy. He started reading law books, and he pulled himself up without going to Annapolis or school like that. He pulled himself up till he took tests and became a commander in the Navy. And he was a commander of the battleship USS West Virginia. And he wrote us a postcard 6 months before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And he said, "You watch, we're going to be in a war with Japan." He knew it, that we were going to be in a war. Well, it was a surprise attack when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. But he was, and my father never heard from him for 37 months because he was in the camps. He was taken at Corregidor
As a prisoner?
as a prisoner, and he nearly died. He contacted Berry, which is a nerve, the nerve Indians all throughout the body, not getting enough vitamin B and E and all. And they had very little to eat, just white rice, maybe a little fish, I don't know. But I used to say to him, "Did you ever catch any rats?" Just chiding with him, and he said, "If we could catch them, we would eat them."
Wow.
Yeah, he said that was all our only protein.
Well, tell us what was the greatest things that you learned from your mother and your father? What things
Well,
did you feel were the...
As I said, my father was very, very quiet, but my mother, but they were both religious. And I remember when I was young, they had some friends, and about once a month they would leave Magna and come into the Salt Lake Temple. And they didn't tell me much about the temple, but I knew that they were active in going to the temple. And I remember how that put me at peace, knowing that they were active.
Did you grow up then in Magna or in Alpine? Or did you move from Alpine?
I was in Magna until about 16, and then we started to get problems with our nose and throat because the chemicals in the pollution from the smelter, they would let it out at night, and we were right in the smoke pocket. And I have rhinitis from it, and I have a low-grade infection of asthma, and so did my sister and my mother. The doctor said, "You've got to leave Magna, or you might die at a young age."
You were born there, were you not?
Yeah, I was born in Magna, in a home, not in a hospital. And my father was quite a builder. He loved to build. He built the 2 homes that we lived in Magna, and they had bought property on 45th South and 16th East a few years before, and so my sister and I went and got a for sale sign and put out in front of the house. And we said, since the doctor said we have to move, we're going to leave. And within a week, we sold our house.
Wow.
So my father got an old double garage that was about ready to collapse. He found it from somebody, bought it from someone, and he fixed that up and stuccoed it and made it into 2 little rooms. And we lived there while he built our home. So if you ever pass 16th East, you see a little bay window.
The little green home
White.
with white shutters.
Yeah, I remember. You showed it to me. Is
Yeah.
that's the home that he built, or is that the garage that he fixed up?
No,
into
he
a
built
home?
the home. The garage is still standing in the back.
Wow.
The garage is still up.
So
White stucco.
he built the home right next to the garage there.
Right in front of
In
it.
front.
Wow.
The garage is in the
Right in
rear.
front of it.
But he never used it as a garage.
And at that time, was it just farm around, or were there
Oh
other
yeah,
houses?
he
close
built,
by?
he planted fruit trees and vegetable gardens and flowers, gladiolus, everything. He was a master farmer, he really was. And when his mother, when they lived in Sugar House, they didn't have any running water, they just had a pump outside. He put a big barrel on top of the house, and then he had a hose going up from the pump. And he had his brothers always keep water in that barrel for his mother, so she always had running water in her house.
That's genius.
And well, he did. He just was doing these all the time. And she sewed, and she had the old treadle machine, and it was at the time they didn't have electric machines. So he hooked a little motor up to her machine so that she could, it was almost, like an electric machine that she could use. So he was always doing things for his mother.
Sounded a lot like Eric.
Yeah.
Very good with his hands.
So, Grandma, you kind of grew up out in more the farm area, because at that time it was very farmy, and Grandpa, you grew up
In the
right
city.
in the heart of the city.
My mother used to call him a city slicker.
The city's
So, and I used to help my father plant potatoes and dig them up, and celery. We even tried celery, and that was a big chore. I can see why they're so expensive, because you plant them, little pieces of celery, and then every other day you'd have to go up, and as they grew, you'd have to keep building the soil around them. They just didn't grow big stalks. You had to just keep putting the soil as they grew. They still had to have the soil around them until they were this. When they were this high, the soil was up that high, for them.
Interesting.
And he just loved it. And then during the war, no, it wasn't the war, during the Depression, he had about 500 chickens. And this was when we lived in Magna, and also we had chickens in Holiday. But we were there in Magna at the time of the Great Depression, as they call it, 29, 30, 31, 32. And he would, they didn't make much, they didn't make much money. And so what he would do is he would take the chickens, and I'd help him pull. Had about 500 chickens. And this was when we lived in Magna, and also we had chickens in Holiday. But we were there in Magna at the time of the Great Depression, as they call it, 29, 30, 31, 32. And he would, they didn't make much, they didn't make much money. And so what he would do is he would take the chickens, and I'd help him pull the feathers off the chickens and clean them, and then we would take them down to the store for food. He would
Trade them.
trade them for food. Eggs, chicken, I think he was one of the first he sent to Mexico for these big purple onions. And I'd never seen a purple onion before, and he started to raise purple onions, beautiful onions, and then he sold them to the stores, and then in turn we would get what we needed for food. I'd never have to go and take money to the store because we always had a credit account.
With your, because of the onions.
With the onions and the chickens.
And the celery.
I used
And the
to,
eggs.
and the eggs, I used to help chop their heads off and hang them up on a line. At about 12 years of age, I couldn't do it now. And put them in hot water, you know, and clean them. And I think the children now think the chickens come,
They just come from the
without
grocery
any
store.
feathers and turkeys, because
I
we
saw
used,
that.
we used to have to clean our turkeys. We'd take candle or paper with that my father would roll up, and then he would light the paper, and then he'd run over the turkeys to loosen all of the feathers. And you know how the black, they'd stick in instead of having to take a tweezer to pull out the black part from the skin of the feathers or the turkeys. If he used a little bit of the fire, it would loosen all of that. So that's what we used to do, was clean turkeys and clean chickens and candle eggs.
Would you do that before and after school?
Yes, yes it did,
And
on
how
Saturdays.
far was school?
And then it continued when we moved to Holiday. There was a grocery store up on Highland Drive and 45th South, and we used to do that and take the things up to that store as well.
It's called the bartering system.
Yeah.
That's the barter.
So it was very, very interesting life, and I've told Sylvia, I said, I think I was born with a testimony. I didn't, they didn't teach me a lot at home, but my mother saw to it that we went to primary and to Sunday school and all, and I just loved my teachers, and I loved the gospel, what I heard, and I never doubted it. And I can never say that I wondered about it, because my great-grandparents lived in Palmyra, New York, when they came from England. They lived next door. They had a farm. They had a farm next to the prophet Joseph Smith. And my mother's told stories of when he was in.
Yeah, he bonked his head.
And when he was in the jail in Carthage, one of my relatives, could have been my great-grandfather or any of you, he was about 5 years of age, they would ask the young children to go and play around the jail and see if they could hear anything from the guards, what they were going to do with the prophet Joseph Smith.
Wow.
And they loved the prophet. That's all they talked about, is what a great person he was. He loved young children. He wrestled with them. He played ball with them. He was always outside. He was quite interested in sports, the prophet Joseph was. And so they soon joined the church after he received the plates and all, because they just believed in him. So my mother used to tell me stories about this, and then some of them went to winter quarters and stayed, and their names are on the plaque there at winter quarters, and they crossed the plains. So
Well, I think that's a good stopping point for tonight. I think that's sets the foundations for us. Gives us a good idea of how it all began.
Well, it might not be very interesting.
It is interesting. I'm learning more stuff. There's always something that I haven't heard.
You can stop.
You can stop it, but I wanted,
Like
and
to-
I'm going to make a copy for Sylvia and you. I think I
I
sent
probably
one of
have
these.
it.
You have this, don't you?
I think so.
Because this, this tells about in the 1700s of the Wynn family, and you might know some Wynns in the here.
Winn-Dixie.
Winn-Dixie, that's where they lived, is in the South. But it said a few years prior to the Revolutionary War, John, William, and Richard Wynn, all sons of the immigrant Minor Wynn. Now it was Minor Wynn. Minor Wynn was one of the sons, and he joined the church in South Carolina. And that was Fauquier County, Virginia. Fauquier. That sort of sounds French. doesn't
Mom,
it?
do you want more light?
No, I'll be okay.
'Cause I have-
Maybe that'll help. Anyway, they came to South Carolina. They were educated and intelligent men and trained as surveyors, a common profession for Virginians coming to the new land of that state. By virtue of their profession as surveyors, they were in a favorable position to acquire large land holdings in this state and, as a general rule, became well-to-do. William Wynn came to South Carolina, as did his brother John. He married Rosamond Hampton, an aunt of the Revolutionary War Colonel Wade Hampton, and sister of Anthony Hampton. And boy, when you go to South Carolina or the South, I guess Hamptonian too was from them.
So.
Mrs. Lettuce, can you believe this? Her name was Lettuce, Lettice. Mrs. Lettuce Bearden of Spartanburg District was reported as being a sister of General Richard and Colonel John Wynn. Mourning Bearden. Now you've heard that name, I'm sure, Mourning, of the pioneers. Daughter of Lettuce Bearden, married Judge Captain William Smith of Spartanburg District, an acting patriot of the Revolutionary War. I didn't even know that we had any relatives in the Revolutionary War. I was asked years ago, would you like to be a daughter of the Revolutionary, Revolution, Daughters of the Revolution? And I said, I didn't have any relatives in the Revolution. Then I read this, and they were. In February 1696, a group of Congregationalists arrived at Charlestown from Dorchester, Massachusetts. They proceeded up the Ashley River and established the settlement known as Dorchester after their place of origin in Massachusetts. A number of South Carolinians went with the church to Georgia. They were devoted members of the church, and several members of the family became Presbyterian ministers. John, Peter, Thomas Summer, and Thomas Clay Wynn. In 1788, Peter Wynn was one of the founders and members of the Sunbury Academy in Georgia. Major John Wynn was one of the teachers in the academy. John Wynn, the eldest son of the immigrant Minor Wynn, and his wife, Margaret O'Connor, was born in Virginia in the year 1727. He married Dorothea Wright in Alexandria, Virginia, right where you were yesterday.
Cool.
On August 17, 1758, and by her had 7 children. Dorothea Wynn died during Cornwallis's occupation of Winnsboro in 1780. In August 82, John Wynn married Penelope Kirkland, and they had
Wouldn't it
8
be
children.
Penelope? Okay.
Might be P-E-N-E-L, yeah, it's
I'm guessing.
Penelope.
It looks like Penelope.
Yeah, it does.
Penelope.
Penelope.
By the end of 1773, John Wynn had bought 3,000 acres of land
Wow.
and had an additional 432 acres surveyed for him. This qualified him as a large landowner in the upcountry between the Broad and watery Catawba rivers. It was something more than the ownership of this land that caused John Wynn to be recognized by the powerful and influential men in Charleston. There had to be a quality of integrity and leadership that caused him to be selected as one of the representatives in the first provincial Congress from the district between the Broad and Catawba rivers. This Congress was held in Charleston beginning January the 11th, 1774. Now I've got here my mother, Catherine Ann Hamlet, had ancestors come from Wales. Her mother was Catherine Jeanette Wynn, and her great-grandfather was Minor Wynn. So see the tie
Yeah.
of the Minor Wynns and John Wynns and all, they were all tied.
And these wealthy
Wealthy.
families,
Because there's a Winnsboro, South Carolina, that they established. So if you ever get back,
that's
South-
why I married Shirley, because of her inheritance.
Powerful.
And then it somehow disappeared, huh?
yeah, boy. In Boston, on May the 13th, 1774, after the closing of Boston Harbor by the British, a resolution was sent down to the 13 colonies asking that they join together in preventing the further exportation of goods to Great Britain and the West Indies, and the importation of goods from these places. The resolution was received in Charleston, and on July the 6th, 1774, a number of the more prominent citizens of the city of Charleston gathered at the Corner Tavern to consider the Continental Congress to be held in Philadelphia on the first Monday in September 1774. The group, meeting at the Corner Tavern, named a committee of 99 persons to see to the carrying out of the resolution preventing the importation and exportation of goods, and as a general committee to carry out needed business. And I guess y'all heard about the Boston Tea, and that's,
Tea Party.
they were involved in that and trying to stop because of the taxation.
That's neat.
One of the first acts of this Congress was to pass the Bill of Rights that had been passed earlier by the Continental Congress. They also approved the association by which imports and exports with Great Britain of the Continental Congress, Britain, and the West Indies was to be controlled. They approved the resolution of the Continental Congress that called for the trial of political and other prisoners by their peers in the colony in which the offense took place, instead of sending all such prisoners to England for trial. Having first met in January 1775, South Carolina Congress was called back into session on June the 1st, 1774, after learning of the Battle of Lexington and Concord that had been fought on April the 19th, 1775. This Congress made immediate preparations to raise 2 regiments or foot infantry. On the day after the decision to raise the 2 regiments of infantry, and almost as an afterthought, the Provincial Congress decided to raise a regiment of Rangers. The officers were elected, and among them was Richard Wynn, John Wynn's brother. The Rangers were to have a wide-ranging tour of duty in the upcountry. They were to discourage loyalist activities, protect the Whigs, W-H-I-G-S, or American sympathizers, and by their presence encourage the upcountry citizens to join the American cause. The year 1775, 76, and 77 were busy ones for John Wynn. He had attended the first provincial Congress meeting in Charleston during 75. The second provincial Congress began its session on February the 1st, 76. After hearing that Great Britain considered the colonies in a state of rebellion, and with dissension between the more conservative and more belligerent members, the Provincial Congress adjourned on the morning of March 26, 76, to meet the same afternoon as the General Assembly. John Wynn was a member of this first General Assembly. The Constitution of 76 was adopted on the afternoon of Tuesday, March the 26th, 76, by the General Assembly. 13 men were picked, without reference to district or parish, to serve as a legislative council that would soon evolve into the Senate. Your relative was involved in the First Continental Congress, which I thought was quite interesting.
That's amazing.
Then Colonel John Wynn in the Revolutionary War. Very little is known of the military activity of Colonel John Wynn from the summer of 78 until the fall of Charleston in the spring of 1780. It is very probable that he continued to serve with Colonel, now General, Andrew Williamson, when not busy with his legislative duties as a member of the Assembly. After Charleston fell in the spring of 1780, Colonel John Wynn was patrolled by the British sometime after the fall of the city. In December 1780, Colonel Richard Wynn received word that his brother John had been taken captive by the British, conveyed to Winnsboro, and was under the sentence of death by hanging for having broken his parole. Colonel Richard Wynn, from his camp in the new acquisition, York County, sent word to Lord Cornwallis at Winnsboro to the effect that he would execute the first 100 British officers and men that fell into his hands, and he already had several in captivity if his brother was executed. John Wynn was released by the British soon after this.
Wow.
Boy, wasn't that lucky. He was engaged in farming and leading a quiet life after his parole in 1783. After the war, he was county judge, tobacco inspector, commissioner of the Camden district, and spent subsequent years in selling lots and developing his beloved town of Winnsboro, South Carolina. I thought maybe you'd like a copy of that.
Yeah.
Sure. Well,
Because
that's great.
that's about your ancestors.
Do you know that we were part of the passing the Bill of Rights
Yes,
and the accepting the Constitution,
yeah,
1776,
in the First
and
Continental
fighting-
Congress.
First Continental Congress and fighting the Revolution.
And winning the Revolutionary War.
That is neat.
And here I didn't
And it
know
isn't
that.
that far back. I mean, when you're
It
a little
really
kid, all history just is so far away you can't
Yeah,
relate to it. And as
yeah.
you get older, you realize that it's just barely removed from us.
Yeah.
You know, it isn't that long ago.
Well,
And
I'm
then,
passionately patriotic, as you know, and this on Shirley's side is very intriguing to me.
and then John Wynn, when they came from Wales, it was his son Minor Wynn that heard of the church in South Carolina, and then he moved to Nauvoo and came across the plains. So whenever you meet a Wynn, they're a distant relative of yours. There is a Bishop Wynn, and then he was made
We
state
had
rep.
some winds in our ward out in Sandy, and we had some by the other name you were talking about tonight.
We knew some wins, but they were
Wild.
losers.
They weren't winners. No.
Wild, was that the...
No, they were
Killers.
Yeah, the
Oh,
Wilds. Remember, honey? Do you remember Linda Wild and it's a Roger's brother, right? Brother-in-law.
Oh,
Josh, you were a good little
Ken
boy
Rogers'
during
brother-in-law.
all this.
They were
sorry.
a
You
good
were a
sized
good little
family.
boy during all
My
this.
mother's grandmother was
05.
Today is Monday, April 11, 2005. And this is the second session that grandson Russell has engineered for Shirley and me to explain some of our history. And he's asking tonight that we talk about our early childhood. And I'm supposed to start the session tonight, so I'll try to remember and talk about some of my earliest recollections in my childhood. I was born on number 2 Canyon Road in a basement apartment where my father and mother raised us, and I was the last of 5 children. My earliest recollection is going up and down the back steps of this apartment house, because I could crawl up and down those steps, and they were wooden, come out on the porch and watch the traffic go by and watch the weather, because we had lots of snow and rain and ice, and we had lots of beautiful sunshine and trees also across the street. Now, our ward house, our meeting house, was the 18th Ward and was up the hill on 2nd Avenue and A Street. There was quite a hill to climb to get up there, but Mother and Father would take us up that hill and up to the meeting house walking until later in our life when Heber, my oldest brother, had a car. Then we could go in the automobile. But we walked many, many round trips up to our ward and back.
Did you have many ward activities that, as a youth? Did they have youth activities, or what kind of involvement?
Well, later on, in juvenile years.
My question, Grandpa, because they won't be able to hear it unless you repeat it.
All right. The question is about activities in the ward, but that occurs later in my life and in my juvenile years, teenage years, and so on. But you're asking about our earliest childhood, and primary was just when I was a youngster, 5, 6 years old. I remember going to primary there, and my primary teacher was my 3rd grade teacher, or 1st grade teacher, in Lafayette grade school. And she was also my primary teacher, and it was fun. Miss Patrick was her name. She was a wonderful lady, and I always remember her as being such a kind, lovely lady to teach us both in school and in church. Now, we lived on, as I say, on Canyon Road, and that was the road that led on up to City Creek Canyon and Memory Grove and City Creek Canyon, and that was our playground in our younger years, as well as climbing up State Street up to the Capitol Building and up behind to Ensign Peak, and all of those areas up there that was our playground, and we hiked and picnicked and just had a lot of outdoor activities in those areas. I would like to comment on the Lafayette School because that's where I started grade school in kindergarten there at 5 years of age. And then from 6 years of age and on through the 7th grade, which would be about 13 years of age, I was there at the Lafayette Grade School. Now that was only a half a block away from where we lived. It was on the corner of State Street and North Temple, right at the bottom of Capitol Hill. If you climbed up the hill, you'd get to the Capitol building. And they had a wonderful playground there, and the upper playground in the wintertime was our sleigh riding hill, because there were 2 beautiful hills down there that we would use as our sleigh riding hill and sleigh jump hill. We'd build sleigh jumps. And then the flat part of it was used for softball, football, just about any kind of other lawn type of recreational activities.
What kind of sled or sleigh did you?
What kind of sled did we use? The favorite was the flexible flyer, a 2-runger, and it had wonderful flex in the steering mechanism, and it could take the curves like no other. And it was sturdy enough that when we went down the hill, went off a jump and landed on the other side, it was sturdy enough to hold up under the weight of our slamming.
It is an advertisement, right?
Yeah.
That playground, though, became the center of that whole Lafayette School playground was the center of our gaming activities. And then right across the street to the south was the LDS Business College, and they had a campus there where they played their, it was originally the LDS High School, and that's what it was originally. It became the LDS Business College, but there was a large playground there, a campus really, of grass with bleachers where they held their football games. So that was also a big playground area for us, besides our school grounds. We played a lot of sandlot baseball over there. We played marbles. We had those 2 playgrounds were so convenient and close by that we just never lacked a gang of people around, a gang of youngsters around to play games of ball or any lawn activities that we wanted to get into.
When you played baseball, Grandpa, what was your favorite position to play?
My favorite positions were first base and pitching. I was the pitcher and the first baseman. And in the 7th grade, I'll repeat again, in Lafayette School, we had a baseball team, hardball, and the other grade schools had them too. There are several of the schools around that had these hardball teams. And we would compete with them. Douglas School up on 13th East and Lowell School on the avenues, and further west, a couple of schools out west, and we would exchange our competition around, and we would play this hardball.
Grandpa, did you pitch left-handed then?
No, I pitched right-handed.
Ah.
And that brings up another little story I'll tell you about. But regarding our baseball activities, our pitcher became Mel Whitney, a young man that was a close friend of mine, and he turned out to be our best pitcher, but I was the first baseman. And as a first baseman, I have an old finger glove. I didn't have this wonderful cushion glove that they use these days. And one day I was reaching up, and this was up at Douglas School on 13th East and about 7th South there, and I was on first base. they threw the ball to me to put the runner out. I reached up high to get the ball because it was too high for me, and I clipped the finger, this finger right here, and doubled it right back so that joint was laying right back, and this finger laid right back like that. I thought, I've certainly broken my finger, but I couldn't even get it in the glove because it was sticking up like that. Extremely painful, and my friends. Am I running out of time?
No, I was just checking.
And my teammates immediately, of course, saw the traumatic problem to see that finger sticking up like that, folded backwards, and it had been dislocated. But I didn't know what it was at the time. But we all went out on the street of 13th East, and we hitched a ride. My friends made sure that somebody that came by stopped for us and gave us a ride, took me home. My father took me down to the doctor. The doctor looked at it. You can see this digit here is thinner than the others, and it never did really grow back to its full length, to its full thickness. And he just looked at it and he said, and his name was Dr. Brown, I still remember, and I just admire what he did. He said, now, this is going to hurt, but just hang on, finger back in place, because it was dislocated. And he put it in the palm of his hand, and he kind of kidded with me a little bit, and then by surprise, he eventually just went crunch and put it right back in place. And, that took a lot of skill in those days for him to do that. And it's been fine ever since, except it never fully recovered. But nevertheless, it's been fine ever since. But I thought that was a remarkable bit of skill to do what he did. In one stroke, he just... It made such a noise, I remember. But anyway, my father was so concerned he thought my finger was going to have to be amputated, but it turned out not even to be broken, but simply dislocated. Well, that was one little incident. And we were, as I say, about 13, 12 years old maybe at the time. And I have a little story about 7th grade and our last year at Lafayette Junior High School. It just turns out that Bob McKay and I were very close friends. And Bob McKay is the youngest